came to this beautiful territory in Seal Land, Okanagan, and then this. So many of you saw the wildfires. Sorry, the lights only go off or on. It's a binary here, so you can't really see what we saw at night, which was the west side on the other side of the beautiful lake on fire. Supposedly it was not supposed to jump the lake, but it did jump the lake. Oh, thanks. Can people read though? I know some people are, yeah, maybe just for this thing. Thank you so much. So it did jump the lake. So you'll see that little inset at the bottom photo is the fire on the other side of the lake up over the mountain from where we were, and then it kind of came over to our side. So this is, you know, coming to a new job and starting, and then this shock in August. It's about basically the same week we're in now, a year ago. So I don't want to exceptionalize wildfires in this area. Importantly, that wildfires have long been part of cultivation in Seal territory and throughout BC, and we're just now learning, you know, colonial societies now learning how important wildfires are. So that is simultaneously true and really should be centered at the same time as sort of existential shock that I was feeling as a newcomer settler to this space. So my question was, how do I teach the youth a week or so after this existential shock? Because I was evacuated for about 8 days. And then there was a kind of a reflection, are we going to start the term or not? And we started the term. Luckily, that particular fire was kind of out of in control by that time, but it did reach our campus, very close to the campus where we were teaching, UBC Okanagan. So it was really a kind of a thinking with this youth experiencing increasing eco-anxiety. I myself, not as a youth, but was experiencing this. So thinking about the newcomers coming to that campus for the first time. And then obviously a pedagogical and radical shift. So many of you who teach here are thinking, you know, revisiting like what point is what I'm teaching in the context of this, right? So that kind of pedagogical shock just really made me do a bit of a 180 around things. So I kind of dismissed hope as a sort of politically inert. I know there have been, I know Joanna Macy, and I know many people do center hope, but I kind of felt like it was a bit of a privilege or a luxury for some at some point. So at this point, though, I did a radical shift and thinking, well, something has to get us through this, and centered some, you know, radical understanding of yeah, what we can actually aim for. So I did turn to this fellow. Maybe you've seen him. There are others, of course. I mentioned Joanna Macy. Many of you probably know her as a eco-hopeful person, and other people. But this one was just kind of a new bestseller that had come out of this Dutch fellow, Rutger Bregman, I think is his name, or Rutger Bregman in English. So he was just seeing that this book was out called Humankind, A Hopeful History, kind of turned my attention to a sort of story that might be equally accessible to everyone. So you're going to hear that I kind of center Black feminist thought as well, but this one for particular reasons that maybe many of you know, the constituencies in your class, you kind of have to not alienate people from the beginning. And someone who looks like me, who starts with Black feminism, sometimes triggers people to turn off. So this is why I started with this book, which is very good, but I also often think about epistemological justice and whose knowledges count. So, but yeah, this fellow was a good way in. So his theses, how many people know this book? Anybody? No, you probably, yeah. Okay, so you're familiar probably more with Joanna Macy, which is great too, eco things. But this one had some good sort of theses that were easy for the students to read. So the first chapter we read, that humans are primarily good, cooperative, and resilient when faced with crises, but that we tend to believe the opposite, right? Those of you who've studied Machiavelli or just watched the world unfold can see that we tend to believe this kind of opposite thing, right? That misbelieving, this is really important, the opposite has created violence and losses, right? When we don't believe that humans are inherently good, we do then enact that, right? And that elites in power or authorities in power orient us, and all of these have like air quotes around them because I think the us's always have to be troubled because different communities have different understandings about this. But those in power want us to believe that humans are competitive and cruel. Indeed, the economic system engenders that, right, too. And so that may be how they got to power, but it may not be a universal truth, right? So, but I do like this as it starts with humans because that's where many students are starting with. He has a few case studies. I'm going to skip over the first one a little bit because we started a bit late, but this is, he looks at World War II bombing. He starts with that about how people are thinking about meanness and some of the powers that were dropping bombs in each of those places were banking on that. But the one I really want to focus on, because it does take us to social justice and not just ecological, is his case on Hurricane Katrina. And this one is a really important one because, as we know, hurricanes are gaining in intensity and frequency under climate change. So this is a socio-ecological case study at its heart. So what we saw, those of you who witnessed this happen, was, you see that picture down there, the Superdome. Maybe some of you remember that if you're old enough to have been politically conscious of this. Many of our students haven't been, so that's why I kind of go through this, but there were rampant rumors about rape, murder, etc. in the Superdome that were all false, right? All banking on that negative understanding of humanity. And actually pro-social behavior was more evidence. Rumors proved wrong, right? So in those moments of crises, people were getting each other's backs. But what happened was the National Guard and police came and opened fire on 6 unarmed Black residents and killed 2, right? So we can see when you believe something, it gets enacted, right? Time and time again, we've seen this with police brutality around Black bodies. So if you assume that humans are bad, and indeed certain humans are worse, right? That's what we see with police killings. So this is a really important kind of thing. So he talks about the nocebo effect, which comes from medicine, like the reverse of the placebo, right? Where people's belief in the negative outcomes of treatment actually make the negative outcomes come true. This is a kind of a medical principle, but taken to this kind of effect, Breckman says, if there's one thing to believe from the nocebo effect, it's that ideas are never merely ideas. We are what we believe, we find what we go looking for, and what we predict comes to pass, right? So this was something the students could really kind of see happening. And then, of course, the news, right? We talk about the news as what Bregman calls a daily drug, which is heavily subsidized. So we can't avoid this thing. It produces a kind of a duty often to consume the news as informed citizens of democracies, right? We do our due diligence by looking at the news. But it also breeds rampant cynicism, of course. And he uses this George Gervner, sociologist, who talks about mean world syndrome, right? So this promotes, again, this mean world syndrome. So many of you might, you see those funny newscasts around, like even if you watch The National, for example, or Canadian sort of mainstream CBC news, you see a lot of nasty stuff, except for the Olympics, of course. And then at the end, you've got the moment, which is some people call it like the dog surfing, or like the cat's doing something. So this is like 59 minutes or whatever without the commercial breaks, whatever, 40 minutes. And then you get something weirdly good, but not really good. It doesn't really tell you anything at the end. So yeah, we can see the news is complicit with this. So yeah, this is all the context that we're in with this negativity bias, which Bregman does say, well, yes, we need this, right? So again, to think transdisciplinarity here, as we heard with the first opening plenary, this is good. It's a strategy of survival or evolution. We need to look out for potential dangers all around us. So this is a good sort of behavior that we have, but coupled with availability bias, which is all negative all the time, right? This news cycle. then it produces this kind of mistrust, right? Evils and nothing is good, right? So this is the context, of course, that many of our students, for those who are teaching here, some of you might be students here as well, you are in this swimming constantly, right, with social media and everything. So it really is a barrage. So I just want to pause for a minute and think about maybe just we don't have huge time to share together, but maybe just do a minute of this kind of idea. Think of on your own for a minute. And if you want, jot some notes down and we can think about these in hopefully time for Q&A or discussion. So when you have witnessed crises or difficulties, what human traits have prevailed in your experience? So think back, something that happened to you or you saw on the news, and what kinds of human traits did you see on display? I think for 30 seconds or so. Hopefully you're thinking out there in Zoom land too. So just to quickly go through, because I see we're really close to the end. So how do you feel oriented to act in these crises and why? And so think about sort of how that tempers what you thought with the Bregman thesis about what we witness as negativity. Okay, and so as we're orienting to conceptions of hope, as I mentioned at the outset, questions of power and knowledge and social justice must be brought to the fore. So when I turn to this Dutch white man, Christian man at the beginning, I also need to think about whose knowledges and experiences count. And if we continue to center primarily those who have had the easiest access to power, we risk perpetuating Euro-Western colonial white versions of environmentalism, right? You all know the traps of white colonial environmentalism. So I turn next to Mariam Kaba. Hopefully some of you know her. She's an amazing abolitionist who orients restorative forms of justice. And if you haven't seen her version of hope, it's really important. Hope as discipline in the constant struggle of anti-Black, racialized, and gendered violence. So kind of riffing off of what the opening plenaries folks were talking, I see you back here, thank you both. This idea that hope is not optimism or just a sense, but also a practice. So I think this is really where we want to get to in this understanding, and it's related to climate justice. So if we don't think about the socio with the ecological, we risk colonial white violence. So hope as a discipline, says Kaba, it's less about how you feel and more about the practice of making a decision every day that you're still going to put one foot in front of the other, that you're still going to get up in the morning and you're still going to struggle. That was what I took away from it. That's her version. And then it's work to be hopeful. It's not like a fuzzy feeling, like you have to actually put in energy, time, and you have to be clear-eyed and you have to hold fast to having a vision. It's a hard thing to maintain, but it matters to have it, to believe that it is possible to change the world, right? So this is someone deeply in the trenches of witnessing daily violence and death, right? So if this person can give this kind of thing a crack, I thought, well, this is a version of hope as practice or discipline that is important. So Mariam Kaba and Kelly Hayes have also written a book that says, so this is orients to the pedagogical part. We must also create practice space and practice space for hope. Our movements cannot be echo chambers of doom. When the news cycle is depleting us or members are worn down by loss or defeat, we should acknowledge this and engage in conversations, activities, and exercises that help us reorient ourselves. Cynicism is a creeping enemy. All of those who are teaching now and might have taught 10 years ago might feel like this with your students. I'm just blown away by the same sort of looking constituents, how many of them are feeling inactive now in the same places. So cynicism is a creeping enemy. And I would say my version of hope as a luxury, I'm now thinking with Kaba that cynicism is a luxury. right? We don't have that luxury. We must actively evade it. From group dialogues to artistic exercises and direct actions, we must create for space for renewal and recommitment. So this all sounds kind of like heavy, but I want to just end with sort of thinking of conversations, activities, and exercises that we've been doing together with students. Of course, many of you are doing these things too, but just sort of reaffirming, and you can talk about this in maybe the 2 minutes we have left, hopefully, seeking out and affirming generative news stories, which is hard, right? It's hard to find these, but I'll show a couple of sites. Walking and moving in places outside of the classroom. I know many of you are already committed to that in environmental spaces, and art and creative practices. So I'm just going to quickly look through these. So orienting to good news, thinking both globally and regionally local. So Fix the News is one site that has been really good, and Future Crunch. I don't have those two are kind of related, but they do give all the many good stories about extinction, coming back from near extinction, all kinds of like even things around poverty being alleviated in some places. And then looking within communities who are not usually reported on, like Indigenous protected areas led by First Nations, so that there's a website there on nationhood, and it gives a lot of what's going on with, conservation has been a really colonial white principle practice for so long. So this is a really wonderful story about Indigenous protected areas. So really epistemic or knowledge justice is as key an aspect of climate justice as you can get. Whose knowledges count, right? It can't just be the usual suspect. And then, of course, just thinking about walking and moving in spaces outside of the classroom. Of course, we need to think about attending to mobility and accessibility and thinking about how that can be done. It's not just let's all go out and walk, but sort of check in with how this can happen. And shifting learning outside of boxes to where different human and non-human agents express agency and knowledge. So thinking in the spaces I'm in, there is, for example, reading and learning from Bill Cohen and Jeanette Armstrong, who are both SEAL. We have the privilege at our university of having SEAL professors and knowledge keepers. So SEAL land-based governance structures are this chaptik, which is stories, featuring Sinclair, Coyote, among others. And yeah, those are the two sources that you can get it from. And then this red-winged blackbird, I have a little beautiful sound of a red-winged blackbird by my pond, or by a pond close to where I live. And I'll play that later if we have time, but don't think we do. And lastly, art, music, and creative practice. It's hard to see in this, but this is one of the students in my environmental justice class who's done a painting of the Columbia River. They were looking at nations' understanding of the Columbia River, on both sides of what they call the medicine line, Canada and the US. So you see it's like night and day, and it's a human form, but also sort of morphing into this beautiful river. So that's been a practice. So those kind of questions are, how do we metabolize what's happening? I think that's a key part that the arts offer us, and storying, as our plenary folks this morning said. How do we inspire broader shifts? And what moves us? I think those are really key, because we know that's where the art-based practices do help us with that. Okay, and then that's basically it for me, but I just want to return to gratitude and learn with humility that that beautiful sack with the ponderosa pine tells me in that space where I am now that it needs wildfires to burn, to renew and regenerate, to use your beautiful words from this morning. So it is, again, the paradox of holding the existential threat, but also the necessity of fire in this space that I'm learning where I am now. And and I always have a musical playlist. You can check these things out. If any of you knows that the environmental anxiety song by Ray is really key to sort of show the students that you're not alone. It's an important one. And then there's a Somali Canadian person that does this great beat production at those places. So those are just sort of two offerings around music, but every class we do a music playlist too in the themes. All right, and that's it.